The Wyoming wind didn't so much blow as it did punish. It was a relentless, icy force that swept down from the jagged teeth of the mountains, scouring the high plains of the territory and turning the little town of Pine River into a collection of huddled, shivering shapes in the deepening twilight of 1879. Smoke, thick and gray, fought a losing battle against the gale as it poured from stone chimneys, the promise of warmth inside doing little to comfort those still caught in the open. Along the single main road, which was little more than a wide ribbon of churned, frozen mud, the buildings stood as solemn sentinels against the coming night. The general store, its windows already glowing a soft yellow from within, had its shutters firmly closed. The blacksmith's forge, usually a beacon of heat and noise, was dark and silent, the anvil cold to the touch. From the small white church at the end of the street, a single bell began to toll, its somber notes snatched and torn by the wind, a call to those who might still be out that shelter was not just a comfort, but a necessity for survival. It was into this scene of bitter isolation that a lone figure emerged from the wall of swirling snow and sleet that had begun to descend from the leaden sky. She moved slowly, each step a deliberate effort against the pushing hand of the storm. A worn woolen shawl, once perhaps a deep forest green but now faded to the color of mossy stone, was pulled tightly over her head and across her shoulders, doing little to keep out the cold, sharp teeth. Beneath it, the hem of a simple brown dress, patched in places with careful, neat stitches, was heavy with mud and ice. This was Leona. Her face, pale and etched with a tiredness that went deeper than just a long journey, was turned down against the stinging pellets of ice. In her arms she clutched a small, frayed carpet bag that contained everything she owned in this world. It wasn't much. A second dress, a hairbrush missing a few bristles, a small, well-read Bible with a soft leather cover, and a single folded piece of paper that felt heavier than anything else in the bag. She had been walking for days, catching rides on the wagons of kind-hearted souls when she could, but mostly walking. Her shoes, thin-soled and worn through in places, were soaked and offered no protection from the frozen ground. The hope that had flickered in her chest when she saw the sign for Pine River was now guttering like a candle in the wind. She had a little money, but not enough for a room at the boarding house she could see down the street, its windows promising a warmth that felt 1,000 miles away. Her eyes, a quiet shade of hazel that seemed to hold the weight of the gray sky above, scanned the buildings. The town was shutting down, closing in on itself against the storm. She saw a man hurriedly nailing a shutter closed over his window, and he gave her a curious, slightly wary glance before turning back to his task. A feeling of profound loneliness, colder than the wind, settled in her bones. She was a stranger here with no name to offer, no family to seek out. She was alone. Her gaze fell upon a structure set slightly apart from the others, behind the white church. It was a stable built of sturdy logs with a roof that looked sound. A soft, lowing sound came from within, and a warm, earthy smell of hay and animals was carried to her on a brief lull in the wind. It was a simple, honest smell. Without the money for a proper room, and with the storm beginning to truly unleash its fury, the stable seemed not like a place of poverty but a sanctuary. It was dry. It would be out of the wind. And for a girl who had known far worse, it was a blessing. Pushing open the heavy wooden door just enough to slip inside, Leona was met by a wave of animal heat and the quiet, shuffling sounds of the church's single milk cow and an old, placid horse. They turned their heads to look at her, their large, gentle eyes reflecting the faint light. The air was thick with the sweet scent of hay and grain. It was humble, but it was safe. In the loft above, a great pile of fresh hay promised a soft, insulated bed, far warmer than any frozen field she had slept in before. She found an empty stall in the back, away from the door where the drafts were weakest. With weary hands, she began to gather armfuls of the sweet-smelling hay, making a small nest for herself in the corner. It was a simple act, but it was one of claiming a space, of making a decision to survive. She opened her carpet bag, took out her Bible, and held it for a moment, her fingers tracing the cross embossed on its cover. She didn't open it, but she sent a silent prayer of thanks upwards, grateful for the roof, for the warmth of the animals, for the simple fact that she was no longer walking. Outside, the wind howled around the corners of the stable, a wild thing denied entry. But inside, in her small nest of hay, Leona finally allowed herself to relax. She pulled her thin shawl tighter, curled into the hay, and listened to the steady breathing sounds of the creatures around her. She was hungry and she was cold, but she was sheltered. For tonight it was enough. She had no idea that her prayer for safety had already been heard, and that her sanctuary was about to be discovered by the one man in Pine River whose job it was to find everything. The storm outside the stable walls had grown from a punishing wind into a full-throated roar, a symphony of nature's indifference. Snow, thick and relentless, began to blanket the world in a deep, silencing white. Inside, however, the stable was a pocket of fragile peace. The heat from the animals rose, creating a dome of warmth under the rough-hewn rafters where dust motes might have danced in sunlight but now hung still in the gloom. The only light seeped through the cracks in the door, faint slivers of gray from a moon smothered by cloud. Leona, exhausted to her very soul, had fallen into a fitful sleep, her Bible held close to her chest like a shield, her body curled tightly in the nest of hay. The sounds of the wind were muffled here, replaced by the steady rhythmic chewing of the old horse, the soft snuffle of the cow and the gentle rustle of straw. It was a humble, earthy lullaby, and for a few precious moments, she was oblivious to the world beyond the walls. Meanwhile, through the blinding curtain of snow, a lantern swung, a single bobbing eye of defiance against the storm's darkness. The man holding it moved with a purpose that seemed to push the weather itself aside. His broad shoulders were hunched against the wind, a heavy wool coat dusted with white, and a sheriff's star pinned to his lapel gleamed dully in the lantern's light. This was Caleb. His boots, sturdy and well-made, crunched through the rapidly accumulating snow as he made his methodical way down Pine River's main street. His was a familiar routine, a nightly ritual of checking locks and ensuring his small, scattered flock was safe from the elements and from less natural dangers. But tonight, his rounds held an extra urgency. Old Man Walters, the farmer who lived on the edge of town, had mentioned his prize milk cow had been acting skittish before the storm hit, worried she might have broken through the fence. The church stable was the closest shelter. It was a long shot, but Caleb was a man who checked on long shots. He approached the stable, his eyes scanning the immediate area. No stray cow. But his sharp eyes, accustomed to noticing the smallest details, caught what anyone else would have missed. A single faint scrape in the fresh snow near the stable door, not an animal's track but something else. And the heavy door was not quite fully closed. A prickle of alertness, something deeper and more primal than ordinary suspicion, ran through him. It could be a drifter seeking shelter, which was one thing. Could be something else entirely. His grip on the lantern tightened slightly as he placed a hand on the cold, rough wood of the door. Inside, the shift in the air was subtle. A new draft, cold and sharp, cut through the warmth. The old horse let out a soft, questioning whicker, and the sound jolted Leona from the edges of her sleep. Her eyes flew open, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. The stable was no longer just her sanctuary, it felt like a trap. The door was creaking open, wider and wider, and framed within it was the immense, dark silhouette of a man, backlit by the swirling storm, the glow of his lantern throwing long, dancing shadows that made him seem even larger, a giant from a winter tale. Caleb stepped inside, closing the door firmly against the blizzard behind him. The sudden comparative silence was profound, broken only by the wind's muffled fury. He lifted his lantern high, its light flooding the stable's interior, pushing back the shadows, illuminating the curious animals, the tidy-tack room and finally falling upon the figure in the back stall. He saw the nest of hay, the worn carpet bag, and the young woman shrinking back into the corner, her eyes wide with a fear he recognized instantly, not the fear of a guilty criminal, but the raw, vulnerable terror of a cornered creature. For a long moment, neither of them moved nor spoke. Caleb took her in. She was pale, shivering slightly despite the warmth, her clothes thin and travel-stained. She looked desperately young and utterly alone. The fear in her eyes struck him with a physical force, and the part of him that was more than a man, the part that was a protector by deepest instinct, stirred. His initial wariness evaporated, replaced by a surge of profound concern. "Easy now," he said, his voice a low, calm rumble that seemed to vibrate through the stable's stillness, a voice used to soothing spooked horses and frightened people. He didn't move closer, keeping a respectful distance to avoid towering over her. "I didn't mean to frighten you." He slowly lowered the lantern so its light wasn't directly in her eyes. "I'm the sheriff, Gil. I was just checking on the animals. This is no night for anyone to be out." Leona could only stare, her mind racing. A sheriff. She had been found. Would he arrest her for trespassing? Would he demand she leave back out into the frozen night? Her grip on her Bible was so tight her knuckles were white. She tried to find her voice, but it came out as a faint, choked whisper. I meant no harm. The storm." "I can see that," Caleb said, his tone gentle, his eyes taking in her thin shawl, her worn shoes. He saw the Bible in her hands and something in his expression softened further. "This is a stable, miss. It's for beasts, not people. You'll freeze by morning. The cold gets in through the stones. You can't stay here. The words felt like a sentence. Her shoulders slumped and she looked down at the hay, the hope she had clung to draining away. I have nowhere else to go, she said, the admission costing her dearly. I have a little money but not enough for the boarding house. I just needed a place until the storm passed. Caleb was silent for a beat, his gaze sweeping over her humble setup once more. The pride it must have taken for her to choose a bed of hay over begging was not lost on him. He made a decision instantly, a certainty settling in his gut that this was the right thing, the only thing to do. That's not a problem, he said, his voice firm but kind. Mary's boarding house has a room. I'll square it with her. You can work it off in the morning if it troubles you, but you're not spending the night in a stall. Leona looked up, shock replacing the fear in her eyes. This was not what she had expected. Not kindness. Not an offer of help without strings. She searched his face in the lantern light, looking for mockery or deceit, but found only steady, honest concern. I couldn't ask you to do that, she stammered. You didn't ask, Caleb replied simply. I'm offering. Now gather your things. It's not fit for man nor beast out there, but it's a short walk and I'll see you there safely. He turned slightly to give her space, his presence somehow both commanding and reassuring. He wasn't giving her a choice, but it felt less like an order and more like a rescue. For the first time in a long time, a tiny, fragile ember of warmth that had nothing to do with the stable began to glow in Leona's chest. It was the warmth of a kindness freely given, a light in her personal blizzard. The short walk from the stable to Mary's boarding house was a journey through a frozen, howling world, a stark contrast to the fragile peace Leona had just left. The wind tore at them with renewed fury, and the snow fell in thick, blinding sheets that stuck to their eyelashes and clothes. Caleb walked slightly ahead of her, his broad back a solid, unyielding wall against the worst of the gale, his lantern cutting a precarious yellow path through the white darkness. He moved with a sure-footedness that spoke of a deep familiarity with every inch of the town, even when it was disguised by a storm. Leona, clutching her carpetbag and pulling her thin shawl as tight as it would go, followed in his footsteps, each one a deep impression in the fresh snow that she struggled to match. The cold was a physical assault, but the sheriff's presence, silent and purposeful, was a strange comfort. He had not judged her, had not demanded explanations. He had simply seen a need and acted. It was a novelty that left her mind reeling. They reached the porch of a two-story wooden building, its windows glowing with a welcoming golden light. A sign above the door, swinging faintly in the wind, proclaimed it Mary's boarding house. Caleb didn't bother to knock, simply opening the door and ushering Leona into a paradise of warmth. The shock of it was almost overwhelming. After the biting cold, the air inside was rich with the smells of baking bread, simmering stew and beeswax polish. A large cast-iron stove in the corner of the main sitting room radiated a heat that felt like a physical embrace. The room was simply furnished but spotlessly clean, with braided rugs on the floor and a worn but comfortable-looking settee and chairs. From a back room emerged a woman with a kind, lined face and sharp, intelligent eyes that took in the scene instantly. The sheriff, covered in snow, and the half-frozen, shivering young woman beside him. This was Mary. Her hands were dusted with flour, and she wiped them on her apron as she approached. "Sheriff Caleb," she said, her voice warm with concern. "What in the heavens brings you out on a devil's night like this? And who's this you've found?" "Evening, Mary," Caleb said, his hat in his hands. "Found this young lady seeking shelter in the church stable. Seems she's new to town and the weather caught her short. I told her you might have a room and that I'd vouch for her." Mary's eyes softened as she looked at Leona, who stood dripping melted snow onto the rug, looking down at her worn shoes in embarrassment. Mary saw not a vagrant but a girl who was cold, tired, and proud. "Well, of course she can't be out in that," Mary said decisively, as if the matter were already settled. "Goodness, child, you're frozen straight through. Come closer to the stove. The last room at the top of the stairs is free. We'll get you settled." Leona found her voice, though it was small. I have a little money for a night, ma'am. And I'm a hard worker. I can earn my keep. I don't expect charity." Mary exchanged a quick, knowing glance with Caleb before smiling gently at Leona. "Charity's a warm meal and a dry bed given without expectation," she said. "This is just neighborliness. We can discuss work in the morning if it suits you. For now, let's get you warmed up." Caleb gave a slight, approving nod. "I'll leave her in your capable hands, Mary." He turned to Leona. "You're safe here. Get some rest." His gaze held hers for a moment, a look of quiet assurance before he turned, opened the door onto the storm once more, and was gone, leaving Leona in the sudden, profound silence of the warm room. The next few hours passed in a blur of kindness that felt foreign to Leona. Mary showed her to a small, spotless room under the eaves with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a simple chest of drawers. She brought up a basin of warm water to wash with, a thick, clean quilt, and later, a bowl of hearty stew and a slice of fresh bread. It was more food than Leona had eaten in days, and she ate it slowly, savoring every bite, her body slowly thawing from the inside out. The bed, when she finally sank into it, felt impossibly soft after days of hard ground and a stable's hay. She slept a deep, dreamless sleep, untouched by the wind that still moaned around the corners of the house. Morning arrived crisp and startlingly bright. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside Mary's windows buried under a thick, pristine blanket of white that glittered under a clear blue sky. After a simple breakfast of oatmeal and tea, Leona, true to her word, sought out Mary. "I'd like to earn my keep, ma'am," she said, her voice firmer now after a good night's rest. "Please let me help." Mary, seeing the earnest need in the girl's eyes, did not refuse. She set Leona to tasks, sweeping the common areas, dusting the furniture, beating the rugs out on the porch despite the cold, and later peeling a mountain of potatoes for the evening stew. Leona worked with a quiet, efficient diligence that spoke of a lifetime of chores. She didn't complain, didn't shirk, and her movements were economical and practiced. Mary watched her from the corner of her eye, her approval growing. Later that day, Mary mentioned that many of the townfolk would be gathering at the church for a midweek prayer meeting. "Pastor John gives a fine sermon," she said. "Might be a nice way for you to see some friendly faces." Hesitantly, Leona agreed. She walked to the small white church, the very one whose stable had been her refuge. Inside it was simple and plain, filled with the same clear, cold light that illuminated the snow outside. The townspeople, bundled in their winter best, nodded politely to her, their curiosity gentle. She took a seat in a back pew, trying to make herself small. Pastor John, a man with a gentle voice and eyes that crinkled at the corners, spoke that day not of fire and brimstone, but of forgiveness and the promise of new beginnings. He spoke of casting off the burdens of the past and stepping into the light of a new day, trusting in a plan greater than our own. His words seemed to seep into Leona's very soul, each one feeling as if it were meant for her alone. She listened, her hands folded tightly in her lap, a fragile hope beginning to bud inside her chest. As the congregation filed out, she lingered for a moment, and when she turned to leave, she nearly bumped into a solid form. It was Sheriff Caleb, hat in hand, his expression unreadable for a moment before it softened into a small, quiet smile. He had been there the whole time, sitting near the front. He didn't say anything, just gave her a slight, respectful nod. In that silent exchange, in the wake of the pastor's message, something passed between them. A recognition, a shared moment of peace in the quiet house of God. Then he moved on, but the memory of his smile stayed with her, a warm ember in the crisp winter air. The days following the storm settled into a new, fragile rhythm for Leona. Pine River, under its thick blanket of snow, became a world of sharp, clean lines and crystalline silence, a stark contrast to the chaotic turmoil that had characterized her arrival. Her life, which had been a threadbare tapestry of flight and fear, began to be woven with new, stronger threads of routine and quiet purpose. Each morning, she rose before the sun had fully crested the distant mountains, the floorboards of her small room cold beneath her feet. She would help Mary with the breakfast service for her boarders, the warm, steamy kitchen filled with the good smells of coffee, frying bacon, and baking biscuits. She worked with a silent gratitude, scrubbing pots until they shone, sweeping the floors with long, sure strokes, and finding a deep, simple satisfaction in a job well done. Mary, for her part, grew fonder of the quiet girl with each passing day. She saw the careful mend in the elbow of Leona's dress, the way she saved every scrap of leftover cloth, the reverence with which she handled her well-worn Bible. She was a worker, honest and true, and Mary began to trust her with more than just chores, sharing bits of town gossip and family stories as they worked side by side. The boarding house, for the first time in a long time, felt less like a business and more like a home with Leona in it. And then there was the sheriff. Caleb's presence became a near-daily feature at the boarding house, a fact that did not go unnoticed by Mary, who would often hide a knowing smile behind her dish towel. His visits always had a plausible reason. He would stop by for a cup of coffee, claiming the brew at the jailhouse was terrible. He would bring a notice for Mary to post in her window, a warning about a mountain lion sighting or the schedule for the next supply wagon. He would inquire, with exaggerated seriousness, if she needed help checking the stability of her roof after the heavy snow. but his eyes, those steady watchful eyes, always sought out Leona. He would find her polishing the banister or airing out linens, and he would engage her in small, careful conversations. He asked about her thoughts on the weather, if she found the winter in the territory to her liking, what she thought of Pastor John's sermons. His questions were never prying, never about her past. They were questions about the here and now, about the simple facts of living. He spoke to her not as a sheriff to a stranger, but as one person to another, with a respect that made Leona's guarded heart slowly unfurl. Leona, in turn, found herself listening for the sound of his boots on the porch, for the deep, calm rumble of his voice in the front hall. She began to notice things about him. The way he always removed his hat when he came inside. The patience with which he listened to old Mr. Higgins, who boarded upstairs and loved to tell long rambling stories. The gentle way he spoke to children who ran up to him on the street. She saw the respect the town afforded him, not born from fear, but from a genuine appreciation for his fairness and his strength. A gentle friendship began to grow between them, tentative as a first snowdrop pushing through the frost. During one of his visits, he found her attempting to chop firewood behind the house, struggling with the heavy axe. Without a word, he took it from her, his hand brushing against hers for a fleeting second, a contact that sent a jolt through them both. He proceeded to split the logs with powerful, efficient strokes, the rhythm a steady thwack that echoed in the cold air. He didn't make her feel weak for needing help. He simply saw a need and filled it, then showed her the proper way to hold the axe for when he wasn't around. Another time he brought a book to Mary, a novel he thought she might enjoy. He'd noticed the small pile of books by Leona's bedside when he'd carried a trunk up for her. "Perhaps Miss Leona might like to borrow it after you," he'd said casually, his tone not quite matching the deliberate thought behind the gesture. Leona, who had always loved to read but had little access to books, accepted it with a shy smile that lit up her whole face, a sight that made Caleb's breath catch in his chest. For Caleb, these interactions were a sweet torture. Every conversation, every shared glance, tightened a bond he felt deep in his soul. His inner nature, the wolf that was as much a part of him as his own heartbeat, recognized Leona with a certainty that was both thrilling and terrifying. It was a primal knowing, a quiet, constant whisper that this was his destined mate. The wolf in him wanted to proclaim it, to shield her, to provide for her, to make her his in the way of his people. It was a pull as fundamental as gravity. But the man in him, the sheriff who valued order and honesty, was afraid. He saw the shadows that sometimes crossed her eyes when a door slammed too loudly, the way she flinched at sudden movements. He saw the careful wall she had built around her heart. To reveal his truth, to tell her he was more than a man, that he carried a wild, powerful spirit within him. He feared it would shatter the fragile trust they were building. He feared the fear in her eyes would return, this time directed at him. So he held his secret close, a heavy weight in his chest, and contented himself with the slow, patient work of earning her trust, day by day, conversation by conversation, hoping that when the time came, her feelings for the man would be strong enough to accept the wolf. The fragile peace that had begun to settle over Leona's life in Pine River was as delicate and beautiful as the intricate frost patterns that adorned the windows each morning. It was a peace built on simple routines, on hard work, and on the slowly growing warmth of a friendship that felt like the first true spring thaw in her heart. She had started to believe in her quietest moments, that perhaps her past could remain exactly where it belonged, behind her. The townsfolk had accepted her presence with a gentle, if somewhat reserved, curiosity. She was the quiet girl who helped Mary, the one with the careful hands and the sad eyes that were beginning to show glimpses of light. This newfound sense of security was precisely why the arrival of the stranger felt like a crack of thunder on a clear day. He came on a Tuesday, riding a tired-looking mule and leading a packhorse laden with pelts and trade goods. He was a rough-looking man, with a beard that needed trimming and clothes that smelled of wood smoke and long travel. He was just passing through, he told Mary, looking for a hot meal and a place to stable his animal for a night before pushing on towards the mining camps further north. Mary, ever hospitable, welcomed him and served him a plate of stew in the common room. Leona was there, clearing tables and refilling coffee cups for the other boarders. She moved with a quiet efficiency, her head down, hoping to avoid drawing attention. For a while it seemed she would. The trapper, whose name was Jed, ate hungrily and exchanged loud, boisterous stories with some of the other men about the harshness of the winter and the wily nature of foxes. It was when Mary brought him a slice of apple pie that the man's eyes, sharp and assessing, lingered on Leona as she wiped down a nearby table. He squinted, a frown creasing his weathered brow. He took a long drink of his coffee, his gaze never leaving her. A silence fell over him, a thoughtful, calculating silence that was far more unnerving than his previous loud storytelling. Leona felt the weight of his stare like a physical pressure. A cold dread, familiar and sickening, began to pool in her stomach. She quickened her pace, hoping to finish and escape to the kitchen. "Say," the man called out, his voice cutting through the hum of conversation. "You there?" The girl with the broom. Every eye in the room turned towards Leona. She froze, her back to him, her knuckles white where she gripped the handle. "I know you, don't I?" Jed said, not unkindly but with a blunt curiosity. "You're from over near Rock Creek Settlement, ain'tcha? Worked for a time at the mill there?" Leona slowly turned around, her face as pale as the flour sack towel hanging from her apron string. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. But the man, pleased with his own memory, barreled on, unaware of the devastation he was unleashing. "Sure you are. Leona, right? The quiet one who lived with old widow Henson. You took another bite of pie talking around it? Heard a thing or two about you after I left. Nasty business that was. Shame really." The room had gone utterly silent. Mr. Higgins had stopped chewing. Mary had emerged from the kitchen, her hands still wet, her expression one of dawning horror. Jed, finally noticing the tense atmosphere he'd created, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Oh, now don't everyone look so grim. I'm sure it was all just talk. You know how folks gossip in those small places. Said you'd been caught pilfering from the general store and old man Grierson ran you out of town on a rail." He laughed, a short, harsh sound. "Course, I also heard Grierson was a miserable old coot who'd accuse his own shadow of stealing sunlight. Probably nothing to it. But the damage was done." The words hung in the warm, cozy room like a poison gas. Pilfering. Run out of town on a rail. The kindly faces of the boarders, who had just minutes ago been smiling at her, were now etched with shock, confusion, and a dawning suspicion. Their eyes were no longer friendly, they were wary, assessing, digging into her, judging her based on the careless words of a stranger. Leona felt the walls of the room closing in on her. The warmth of the stove felt suffocating. She saw the looks on their faces, the very looks she had fled from, the looks she had prayed she would never see again. The shame, hotter and more painful than any fire, scorched her from the inside out. Her carefully constructed new life was crumbling to dust around her, destroyed in less than a minute by a man who didn't even think it was important. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't speak to defend herself. The truth of the lies, the injustice of it all, was a knot in her throat too large to untangle. With a choked sound that was half a sob, half a gasp for air, she dropped the broom. It clattered loudly on the wooden floor, the sound shockingly loud in the silence. And then she ran. She pushed past the stunned boarders, flung open the front door, and fled out into the cold, bright afternoon, not caring where she was going, only knowing that she had to get away from those eyes, from those words, from the ruin of her second chance. The only place that had ever felt like a true sanctuary, the only place that held no judgment, was the stable. And so that is where her feet, acting on a desperate, broken instinct, carried her. The world outside was a blur of blinding white and sharp, cold air that burned Leona's lungs with each ragged, panicked breath. She did not feel the cold, did not see the pristine beauty of the snow-laden pines. All she felt was a scorching humiliation that seemed to melt the very ground beneath her feet, and all she saw were the faces in the boarding house, faces transformed in an instant from kindness to wary suspicion. The trapper's careless words echoed in her mind, a cruel taunt that unraveled every fragile thread of hope she had spun over the past weeks. Pilfering. Run out of town on a rail. The phrases were branding irons on her soul. Her flight led her back to the one place that had offered her unconditional shelter, the place where her story in Pine River had begun, the church stable. She shoved the heavy door open and stumbled inside, the familiar scent of hay and animals doing little to calm the frantic beating of her heart. She went directly to the very same back stall where Caleb had found her that first night and collapsed into the hay, her body trembling not from cold, but from a devastation so complete it felt physical. She drew her knees to her chest, buried her face in her arms, and gave way to silent, wrenching sobs that shook her entire frame. It was over. The kindness, the tentative friendship, the promise of a new life, it had all been an illusion, shattered by the ghost of a past she could not outrun. She was once again the girl accused, the outcast, alone. She had no idea how long she sat there, lost in her despair. The light in the stable began to soften, the bright afternoon sun sinking towards the horizon, casting long, deep blue shadows through the cracks in the walls. The animals, sensitive to her distress, were quiet and still. The sound of the stable door opening was not a harsh, sudden intrusion this time, but a slow, deliberate movement. A broad silhouette filled the doorway before stepping inside and closing the door with a soft, final click. Caleb stood there for a moment, his eyes adjusting to the dim light, his gaze immediately finding the huddled form in the back stall. He had heard. Mary had found him within minutes, her face etched with worry and anger, not at Leona, but at the careless trapper and the fickle nature of gossip. Caleb had listened, his expression growing grimmer with each word, a protective fury simmering in his veins. He had known, with a certainty that went beyond deduction, where she would go. He did not rush towards her. He moved slowly, giving her time to hear him, to know it was him. He walked to her stall and leaned against the rough wooden post, his presence solid and calm amidst the storm of her emotions. He didn't speak immediately, simply waited, allowing the silence to stretch, allowing her to feel that he was there not as a sheriff to interrogate, but as a friend. Finally, his voice was a low, gentle rumble in the quiet stable. Leona. She flinched at the sound of her name but did not look up. Her voice was a muffled, broken whisper from the depths of her arms. Please just go away. You heard what he said. It's true. I was run out of my town. The admission was torn from her, laced with shame. I heard what a passing stranger said he heard, Caleb corrected softly, his tone leaving no room for argument. That's a long way from the truth. Look at me. It was not a command but a request. Slowly, hesitantly, Leona raised her head. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swimming with tears, her face pale and streaked with them. In her expression, Caleb saw not guilt, but a profound and heartbreaking pain. Now, he said, his voice unwavering, tell me your truth. I am listening. And so, haltingly at first, then in a rushing torrent of pent-up anguish, she told him. She spoke of the widowed seamstress she had lived with and cared for in Rock Creek. She spoke of the bitter, miserable owner of the general store, Mr. Grierson, who had accused everyone of stealing from him. She told of the day a small, expensive bolt of silk had gone missing, and how Grierson, looking for a scapegoat and disliking the quiet girl who never spent much money, had pointed the finger squarely at her. There had been no proof, only his word against hers. But he was a respected shopkeeper and she was a nobody. The whispers started, then the shouts. She was given a choice: leave quietly and never return, or face a trial she knew she would lose. To save herself from jail, she had chosen exile, carrying the stain of a crime she did not commit. I didn't take it, she finished, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes pleading with him to believe her. I would never. I swear it on my Bible. Caleb listened to every word, his eyes never leaving hers. He saw the raw honesty in her face, the truth of her character that he had witnessed every day in her hard work and quiet humility. When she finished, he simply nodded, a deep and final certainty settling within him. I know you didn't, he said, his voice filled with a conviction that brooked no doubt. I believe you. The simple, powerful statement was a balm on her wounded soul. It was the thing she had longed to hear, the absolution she had been denied. A fresh wave of tears welled in her eyes, but these were tears of relief. Caleb took a deep breath. The moment was here. Her truth was out. Now it was time for his. You've trusted me with your secret, he said, his tone grave. Now I need you to be brave and I need you to trust me again. I need to show you mine. A flicker of confusion crossed Leona's tear-stained face. What secret could a sheriff possibly have? Caleb took a step back, giving her space. The air around him seemed to shimmer, not with heat, but with a strange, potent energy. His form, solid and real, began to change. It was not a violent or grotesque transformation, but one of profound and ancient magic. His body shifted, folded in on itself, and where the tall, broad-shouldered sheriff had stood, there now stood a massive wolf. Its fur was the same dark, rich brown as Caleb's hair, and its eyes were his. The same steady, intelligent, kind eyes looked out from the wolf's noble face. Leona's breath caught in her throat. Every instinct should have screamed at her to run, to fear this powerful wild creature. But she did not. She was frozen not by terror but by awe. The wolf made no move toward her. It simply stood there, patient, waiting. And in its eyes she did not see a beast. She saw Caleb. She saw the man who had offered her kindness without question, who had believed her without proof, who had protected her. She saw the same soul looking back at her. As quickly as it had begun, the transformation reversed. The wolf dissolved back into the form of the man, Sheriff Caleb, standing before her slightly breathless, his expression a mixture of anxiety and hope. My people, we are shifters. Guardians. It is who I am. It is my truth. Leona stared, her mind struggling to comprehend the impossible. The stories she'd heard as a child, the myths, they were real. And they were standing before her in the form of the best man she had ever known. The fear did not come. Instead, a profound sense of understanding washed over her. His strength, his uncanny intuition, his deep connection to the land and its creatures, it all made sense now. He had shared his deepest, most vulnerable secret with her, trusting her not to recoil from him. Slowly she rose to her feet. She took a step toward him, then another, her eyes never leaving his. She reached out a hand, not in fear but in acceptance, and gently placed it on his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. The same heart that beat in the wolf, the same heart that had always been kind to her. "I believe you," she whispered, echoing his own words to her. And in that moment, in the quiet, holy space of the stable, two secrets had been exchanged, two truths had been laid bare, and the fragile friendship between them solidified into an unbreakable bond of trust and something far, far deeper. The days that followed the exchange of truths in the stable were transformed, imbued with a new and profound depth. The air between Leona and Caleb, once filled with the tentative steps of a growing friendship, now hummed with a silent, powerful understanding. The fear and shame that had sent Leona fleeing into the hay had been washed away, not just by Caleb's belief in her innocence, but by the staggering vulnerability of his own revelation. They shared a secret now, a magnificent and terrifying truth that bound them together in a way ordinary courtship never could. The world outside, with its gossips and its judgments, seemed to fade into a distant murmur, unimportant against the solidity of what was building between them. Caleb's visits to the boarding house continued, but they were different. There were no longer excuses about coffee or notices for the window. He came to see Leona. Their conversations, once careful and polite, now ranged over everything. He spoke of his family long since past, and how the mantle of his shifter nature had been passed down to him alone in this territory. He spoke of the weight and the privilege of being a guardian, of the deep, instinctual connection he felt to the mountains and the forests, a connection Leona now understood in a way few ever could. She, in turn, spoke more freely of her life before the accusations, of her love for reading and sewing, of her simple dream of a home and a family, a dream she had thought forever lost. They took walks together when Caleb's duties allowed, their path often leading them away from the main street and out towards the edge of town where the wilderness began to reclaim the land. They walked in a comfortable silence sometimes, simply enjoying the crunch of snow under their boots and the vast, crystalline silence of the Wyoming winter. Leona no longer saw the landscape as a harsh and forbidding place. Through Caleb's eyes she began to see its fierce beauty, its raw, untamed majesty. He pointed out animal tracks she would never have noticed and explained the patterns of the weather moving over the peaks. He was sharing his world with her and she welcomed it all. One afternoon, a few weeks after the stable, Caleb suggested a walk to a particular spot he knew. The sun was shining and the air, though cold, was still. They trudged through deep snow, Caleb breaking the path for her, until they reached a high bluff that overlooked the entire Pine River Valley. The view was breathtaking. The town below was a tiny cluster of buildings nestled in the pure white expanse, smoke curling lazily from chimneys. The river, a dark, snaking ribbon of ice, wound through the snow, and beyond it, the mighty mountains stood sentinel, their peaks glowing pink and gold in the late afternoon sun. It was a view of immense peace and profound isolation, a world unto itself. They stood there for a long time, side by side, watching the light change over the valley. The only sound was the sigh of the wind through the pine boughs behind them. Caleb was uncharacteristically quiet, and a nervous energy seemed to radiate from him, a tension that felt different from his usual calm strength. Leona glanced at him, concerned, but said nothing, simply waiting. Finally he turned to face her fully. His expression was serious, his eyes holding an intensity she had never seen before. He took both of her mittened hands in his own, his grip firm and warm even through the wool. "Leona," he began, his voice low and slightly husky with emotion. "From the moment I found you in the stable, I knew you were special. I felt it here." He released one of her hands to tap a fist gently against his chest, over his heart. "My wolf knew it. My soul knew it. These weeks with you have only made that knowing deeper and truer. You have a strength and a goodness that humbles me." He took a deep breath, his gaze unwavering. "I told you my truth because I want no secrets between us. Ever. You have seen all of me, the man and the other, and you did not turn away. You have trusted me with your truth, and I will spend every day of my life proving myself worthy of that trust." He slowly, reverently lowered himself to one knee in the snow, looking up at her, his face filled with a love so raw and honest it made her heart ache. He still held one of her hands. "I love you, Leona. I want to build a life with you, a life of faith and honor and family. I want to protect you and provide for you not because you need it but because it would be my greatest joy. I want to wake up to you every morning and thank the Lord for bringing you to my stable door." He paused, his eyes shining. "Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of pure, unadulterated joy welled in Leona's eyes, blurring the magnificent vista before her. The man she had come to love so deeply, the man of immense strength and breathtaking vulnerability, was offering her everything she had ever dreamed of and more. He was offering her a forever built on the solid rock of complete honesty and unwavering faith. There were no doubts, no hesitations, only a soaring, glorious certainty. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Then, stronger, clearer, she said it again. "Yes, Caleb. 1,000 times yes." A smile broke across his face, a smile of such radiant happiness and relief that it seemed to outshine the setting sun. He stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her once, carefully, in the deep snow as she laughed, a sound of pure delight that echoed across the silent bluff. He held her close, her head against his chest, and they stood there together, wrapped in each other and the promise of the future, the entire world laid out at their feet. The engagement was not a question of if, but a proclamation of what would be. Their journey together was just beginning. The news of the engagement between Sheriff Caleb and the quiet girl from the boarding house spread through Pine River not as a shock, but as a gentle, inevitable tide. The initial gossip sparked by the trapper's careless words had been thoroughly doused by Mary's fierce defense of Leona's character and, more importantly, by Caleb's steadfast and very public devotion. The town, which took its cues from its respected sheriff, saw his choice and followed suit, embracing Leona not as an outsider, but as one of their own, a woman worthy of the love of a good man. An air of happy anticipation settled over the small community, a welcome warmth in the deepest grip of winter. The preparations for the wedding became a town affair, a project that brought everyone together. It was decided the ceremony would be held in the little white church, the very heart of the community, where their story had indirectly begun. Pastor John was delighted to officiate, seeing in the couple a testament to faith, forgiveness, and new beginnings. The women of the town descended upon Mary's boarding house with a generosity that left Leona breathless. They brought bolts of fine white muslin and delicate lace, saved for special occasions. The sitting room was transformed into a bustling seamstress's shop, with Leona at the center, being carefully measured and fitted for a dress far more beautiful than anything she had ever owned. She had dreamed of sewing it herself, but the skilled hands of the town's women took over, their needles flying as they shared stories and laughter, weaving Leona into the fabric of their community with every stitch. Mary took charge of the festivities to follow, planning a simple but hearty wedding supper in the church meeting hall. Women brought preserves, cured meats, and sacks of potatoes. The men butchered a hog and promised to keep a fire pit roasting all night. There was to be music too, a fiddle and a harmonica, and promises of dancing. The entire town was invested, eager to celebrate the happiness of a man they respected and the woman who had clearly brought a light to his eyes. Throughout it all, Caleb and Leona saw little of each other, adhering to the tradition of not setting eyes on one another before the ceremony. But their separation was filled with a sweet anticipation. Caleb spent his days ensuring the peace of the territory, a lightness in his step that even the grumpiest of miners noticed. He had a simple, sturdy house at the edge of town, and in the evenings by lamplight, he worked to make it ready for a wife, building a new chest of drawers, sweeping the hearth until it shone, and imagining a future within those walls. Leona, for her part, stayed with Mary, her heart so full it felt it might burst. The shadow of her past was truly gone, replaced by the tangible love of a man and the embracing kindness of a town. She spent her time helping with the preparations, her own needle adding careful embroidery to the collar of her wedding dress, each stitch a silent prayer of gratitude. She and Pastor John met to discuss the service, choosing verses from the Bible that spoke of love that bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things, and of the strength found in two people becoming one flesh. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bitterly cold, but the sun shone with a brilliant, unwavering light, setting the snow ablaze with diamonds. The church was packed, every pew filled with the bundled-up, smiling faces of the townspeople. Bunches of winter greenery and pine cones adorned the ends of the benches, filling the air with a crisp, clean scent. When the moment came, Leona walked down the short aisle on the arm of Pastor John, who had offered to stand in for the father she never knew. She was a vision in her simple white dress, her hair styled softly away from her face, her eyes fixed on the man waiting for her at the altar. Caleb stood tall and straight in his best suit, his sheriff's star polished to a brilliant shine. His gaze, full of awe and unwavering love, never left her face, and as she reached his side, he offered her a small private smile that promised her the world. Their vows were simple, traditional, and spoken with a conviction that brought tears to the eyes of many in the congregation. They promised to love and to cherish, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, forsaking all others for as long as they both should live. When Pastor John pronounced them man and wife, a collective sigh of happiness seemed to sweep through the church. The celebration that followed was everything a frontier wedding should be, filled with good food, lively music, and genuine joy. There was laughter and dancing, and for one night, the hardships of territory life were forgotten. Caleb and Leona, hand in hand, were passed from well-wisher to well-wisher, their happiness a beacon in the center of it all. As the evening drew to a close and the stars, sharp and cold, pierced the black velvet sky, Caleb led his new wife through the quiet, frozen streets to their waiting home. He carried her over the threshold, a tradition he insisted upon, setting her down gently in the main room where a fire crackled warmly in the hearth. They were alone for the first time as husband and wife, the sounds of the celebration distant echoes. The house was humble, but it was clean, warm, and filled with the promise of a life built together on a foundation of truth, faith, and a love that had been tested and had emerged stronger than steel. Their life together, their sacred marriage, had officially begun. The deep winter snows gradually relinquished their hold on Pine River, yielding to the gentle, persistent thaw of spring. The world outside the small house at the edge of town transformed from a monochrome landscape of white and gray into a vibrant tapestry of green shoots, budding trees, and the cheerful chatter of returning birds. Inside, the home that Caleb had built and that Leona had made into a warm, loving haven was filled with a new kind of peace, a settled contentment that came from a marriage built on unwavering trust and deep affection. Their life together was a quiet rhythm of shared chores, evening prayers, and conversations by the fire, each day strengthening the bond between them. It was during this season of renewal that a different kind of change began to bloom within Leona. At first, it was a subtle thing, an unusual tiredness that would come over her in the afternoons, a slight queasiness in the mornings that she attributed to something she had eaten. But as the weeks passed, the signs became more pronounced and impossible to ignore. A profound fatigue would settle in her bones, and the smell of certain foods, once pleasant, would now send her rushing from the room. Caleb, with his preternatural awareness of her, noticed immediately. His concern was a tangible thing, a constant, gentle presence. He would watch her with those keen eyes, his brow furrowed. "You're feeling poorly," he stated one morning, his voice soft with worry as she pushed away a plate of eggs, her face pale. It wasn't a question. Leona placed a hand on her stomach, a dawning realization beginning to push through the fog of her fatigue. The pieces were falling into place. The missed courses, the strange aversions, the overwhelming tiredness. A hope, so immense and terrifyingly beautiful that it stole her breath, began to flutter in her chest. She looked up at her husband, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder. I think it might be more than just feeling poorly, Caleb," she whispered, her voice trembling. Understanding, slow and then stunning in its brilliance, dawned on his face. His sharp intake of breath was loud in the quiet kitchen. He knelt beside her chair, his large, calloused hand coming to rest gently over hers on her stomach. His touch was reverent, his expression one of awe. "A child?" he breathed, the word sounding like a prayer. Tears welled in Leona's eyes as she nodded, a sob of joy catching in her throat. "I think so." The news, once confirmed by a visit to the town's midwife, filled their home with a radiant, almost holy light. Caleb's protectiveness, always a steady force, became a palpable thing. He fussed over her, making her sit while he finished the chores, his hands constantly reaching out to touch her shoulder, her hair, her hand, as if to reassure himself that she was real, that this miracle was truly happening. His joy was a quiet, deep-running river, evident in the new softness in his eyes and the way he would often just stop and look at her, his love and wonder shining forth like a beacon. For Leona, the months that followed were a journey of profound physical and spiritual transformation. Her body changed, rounding with the new life growing within her, a constant, miraculous reminder of the love she shared with her husband. She would often sit by the window, her hands resting on her swollen abdomen, feeling the gentle flutters and kicks of their baby, and she would pray. She prayed for a safe delivery for a healthy child, and she poured out her gratitude for the blessings that had brought her from a stable in a storm to this home, this love, this miracle. The women of the town, led by Mary, rallied around her once more. They brought tiny hand-stitched gowns and blankets, their gifts practical and filled with goodwill. They shared their own stories of childbirth, offering advice and reassurance. Leona was never alone. She was cocooned in a community of support, her pregnancy a shared celebration. As the summer reached its peak and began to wane into the golden hues of early autumn, Leona's time drew near. The air in the house grew still and expectant. Caleb, though the picture of calm strength on the outside, felt a nervousness he had never known, a vulnerability that came from loving two people so completely. He rarely let Leona out of his sight, his senses, both human and wolf, hyper-aware of her every sigh, every shift in position. One evening, as the first stars began to prick the twilight sky, the gentle signs began. Leona's quiet gasp, the way she stilled and placed a hand against the small of her back, told Caleb all he needed to know. His calm sheriff's demeanor snapped into place, but his eyes burned with intensity. He helped her to their bed, his touch infinitely gentle, before moving with swift, sure efficiency. He stoked the fire to a roaring blaze, heated water, and sent a neighbor's boy sprinting for the midwife and for Mary. The house, usually so quiet, soon hummed with purposeful activity. Mary arrived first, her presence a steadying force. The midwife followed, her bag in hand, her face kind and competent. Caleb was shooed from the room, but he did not go far. He positioned himself just outside the closed bedroom door, his entire being focused on the sounds from within. He heard Leona's low murmurs, the encouraging words of Mary and the midwife, and each sound was a knot in the rope of his anxiety. He paced the short length of the hallway, his prayers a silent, desperate mantra. He was a man used to facing down dangers, but this, the struggle of his wife bringing their child into the world, was a battle he could not fight for her. He could only wait and trust and pray with every fiber of his being for their safety. The night stretched on, each moment an eternity, filled with the profound hope and terrifying vulnerability of new life. The night had been long, an endless stretch of time measured not by the clock on the mantel but by each strained breath and muffled cry that seeped through the closed bedroom door. Caleb had paced the short length of the hallway until the wooden floorboards beneath his boots seemed to wear thin with his worry. He had prayed until he had no words left, his entire being a single, focused plea for the safety of the two people he loved most in this world. The first faint, gray light of dawn was beginning to touch the windows, painting the world in soft, muted tones, when the sounds from the room changed. The tense murmurs were replaced by a sudden, profound silence and then, a sound. It was a sound unlike any other, thin and fierce and alive. It was the indignant, healthy cry of a newborn. The door to the bedroom opened, and Mary stood there, her face lined with fatigue but her eyes shining with tears of joy. "Caleb," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Come and meet your son." He moved as if in a dream, crossing the threshold into the room. The air was warm and carried a new, sacred scent, the smell of life itself. Leona lay propped up on pillows, her face pale and sheened with sweat but radiant with a happiness so pure it seemed to light the room from within. In her arms, swaddled tightly in a soft, white blanket, was a tiny bundle. Caleb approached slowly as if approaching something holy, and sank to his knees beside the bed. Leona looked up at him, her eyes overflowing with love, and gently shifted the bundle towards him. "Here is your father," she whispered to the baby. With hands that trembled slightly, hands that could subdue a dangerous man or gently split firewood, Caleb reached out. The midwife helped guide the impossibly small weight into the crook of his arm. He looked down and his breath caught in his chest. The baby's crying had subsided into soft, snuffling sounds. He had a cap of dark hair like his father's and his tiny, perfect features were scrunched up in newborn seriousness. As Caleb held him, the baby's eyes, a deep, unknowable blue, fluttered open for a moment, seeming to look straight into his soul. A love so vast and powerful it was terrifying washed over Caleb, so strong it brought tears to his own eyes. This was his son. Their son. The living, breathing proof of the love that had grown from a chance meeting in a stable into this unbreakable family. He looked from his son's face to the face of his wife, his heart so full he thought it might break from the sheer weight of his gratitude. "He's perfect," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "You are both so perfect." In the days and weeks that followed, the little house on the edge of Pine River settled into a new, sweet rhythm. The world outside continued to turn, but within those walls, time seemed to move to the gentle cadence of a newborn's needs. Leona recovered her strength, her love for her child a powerful force that gave her energy even through sleepless nights. Caleb, the formidable alpha sheriff, was effortlessly wrapped around the tiny finger of his son. He would rock him for hours, singing low, rumbling songs, his deep voice a soothing balm. He changed diapers with a focused intensity usually reserved for tracking outlaws, and he would sit for long periods simply watching the baby sleep, his expression one of awe. One warm autumn afternoon, when the aspen trees were shaking their golden leaves like coins in the breeze, Caleb carried a rocking chair out onto their porch. He helped Leona settle into it, ensuring she had a warm blanket, and then carefully placed their sleeping son into her arms. He pulled up a stool beside them, and for a long time, they simply sat in a comfortable silence, the three of them. The view before them was the same one from the bluff where he had proposed, but now it was seen through the lens of their fulfilled promises. Their little town slept peacefully in the distance. The mountains, their peaks now dusted with the first snows of the coming winter, stood as eternal guardians. The air was crisp and carried the smell of wood smoke and dying leaves. Leona rested her head against the back of the rocking chair, looking from her husband's strong profile to the perfect face of their child. Her journey had been long and fraught with hardship, but it had led her here. It had led her to this porch, to this peace, to this love. She had been given a second chance she never dreamed possible, and she had built a life of faith upon it. Caleb reached out and took her free hand, lacing his fingers through hers. His touch was familiar and steady, a constant promise. He didn't need to speak. Everything they had been through, the storm, the secrets, the fear, the trust, the joy, was contained in that simple, loving grasp. They had faced the world and found their forever after not in a grand castle, but in a simple house filled with love, guarded by faith, and blessed with the soft, sleeping breath of their child. Their story, which had begun with a lonely girl seeking shelter, had reached its beautiful, peaceful, and perfect beginning. And so, dear friends, their tale finds its rest, a testament to love's enduring light. If you wish to journey alongside more hearts finding their way through trials to triumph, to witness stories where faith guides the way and love conquers all, then follow this path. Subscribe and become part of our congregation, where every story is a prayer answered and every ending a new beginning.